Guten Tag, listeners of this podcast. If you understood that version of hello, you probably live in Europe. Enjoy this episode of JJ Meets World, where Tucker and I are going to talk about the creative process, whether or not Robert Zemeckis is worth the hype, and certainly why Francis Ford Coppola should not give up on his wine business. Sit back, relax, and enjoy das episode of JJ Meets World. And by the way, if you'd like to help support our podcast, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some killer swag at our merch shop, or click the link to Apple Podcast and give us a 5-star review.
1, 2, 3, 4. JJ Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. JJ has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
Tucker, I went to a musical last Saturday.
You?
Yeah, can you believe it?
Wow.
I went to Back to the Future, the musical, which is a full Broadway show based on the hit Universal Studios film Back to the Future.
The first or the whole trilogy?
It's just the first.
Okay.
It's just, which is interesting because I'm like, I was trying to think to myself, have they ever made a stage sequel to a musical that's on stage?
Yeah, we're doing the two Back to the Future plays in rep.
So I will say this. Boy, the music is just awful.
Oh, shoot.
It is real bad. In fact, there's only one song I even kind of like, and the rest of it is the music's just real bad. But you know, and it's also, I've never been to a show before that asks the audience so much to understand about the plot before they even get in there, right? It's like, I guess maybe the only other show is Titanic,
sure,
right? Where they're like, listen, you know it's a boat, you know it's going to sink.
Yep.
So we'll just fill in the fluffy stuff on the side. That being said...
Do they have a narrator come out and say that like Henry V?
Oh, God, wouldn't that be great? Yeah. But this show was a spectacle. It was unlike anything I've ever seen. The stagecraft alone, they have a full-size DeLorean that like comes out and skids, and so like it's and they get in and out of it. Oh my God. And so what they do is they've got I've seen this in a couple other shows but never used quite like this. So they have two screens. They have a drop down projection screen in the back, and then they have one that comes at the very, very front of the stage that is opaque but see-through. Like you can still see through it. So they rear project things like the clock tower, being in the school, stuff like that. I first saw this in a musical called Mean Girls. And what's unique is every time they'd come back to the cafeteria is projected in the back, but then they have real tables in front of it, right? Every time you go back to the cafeteria, the posters are different that are hanging on the wall. Like there's small details.
Butterfly effect has happened and things are changing.
Right, exactly. Yep. So, you know, like, oh, it's get ready for the fall dance. And then this one is like Secret Santas. And it just intrigued me because that would be difficult to do on like a regular set where, you know, exchanging pieces is just not something you don't want to do. Right?
Yeah. And I guess it would be tempting to go, well, let's just do all of our sets as projection. Going forward, but in fact, it really only has an effect in a certain way. I can see projection being a part of every set in some way going forward, but because they have those physical elements that come in.
So you know how, like when you were in a play, like sometimes you do a scene in front of the curtain, while they're doing a scene change. They utilize this so that while you're prepping for the next scene, because what would happen is while you were doing the scene change, the screen would go up and you'd just bring another scene element straight forward rather than bring it side to side. So like Doc's garage, Doc Brown's garage was a full set piece. And so that was always ready. And so what they did that was so unique is so Marty gets in the DeLorean, and to get to 88, the projected screen behind him moves.
Sure.
It's like it's an old school Hollywood trick,
it makes it look like you're driving.
And they even included like, you know, like the car would be like slightly rumbling and moving, and so then the car would turn and the perspective of the projection perspective would change as he's turning. So the car turns to face you, but now everything's going past you. It was so cool. And one of the neatest elements I saw is they lower that opaque screen in the front, and then they put a rain effect on it. So it looks like they're standing in the rain without actually having to be in the rain.
Sure.
And then there's like Doc Brown has to run to the top of the clock tower. And so they project a stairwell and he like moves in place, and then like he turns and then moves, and while the stairwell's coming down. It was just wild.
I have to sneeze.
Gesundheit. Bless you.
When the car is turning, was it on like a revolve of some kind, or was the car actually driving itself on stage?
It must have been on some kind of a revolve.
Because I'm thinking
because
a car
like when
is
I say
fucking heavy.
It's so heavy. And when I say like it skids, so the introduction of the car is like it's doing like a power slide. So it comes in and it's at an angle and like kind of rights itself as it's coming in. And it comes like at a high speed too.
Right.
So like it is just
I wonder then, I wonder if that's like a gutted DeLorean. So it doesn't weigh nearly as much, and they have some other thing making those movements happen versus having to rely on a human driver to do these fast things in such a tight space. If that goes wrong, that car goes into the audience and kills a bunch of people.
I don't think that it's not like the wheels have like LED lights on them. So when it lights up, I think that makes it look like it's moving.
So the car's not actually
right.
There's no engine actually igniting.
Now, that being said, at the end of the show, which happens at the end of the first movie, it's Marty, you got to come back with me. Where? To the future. And the car flies.
Okay.
The whole DeLorean with two actors in it picks up and is moving like across, and then like they do like a 360 with it, so like each actor can wave to everyone while they're up in the sky. It also did a great job putting Alan Silvestri's score from the movie into it. So in musicals, you get, you obviously music's a big part of it, but you don't hear just like a lot of like score, right? Scores are for movies.
Right.
Like this, and so they're like hearing that like dun dun dun
was one of the musical numbers when Marty gives the crowd a taste of rock and roll.
Yeah, so they still use Johnny Be Good, so they were able to do that, and they were also able to do Huey Lewis's songs. So gotta go back in time, and then The Power of Love, and then everything else was different. And this is another thing that I realized. While watching this musical, it made me just want to watch the movie, right? Because the guy who played Doc Brown in the touring cast played him more as like this kooky mad scientist who like had no confidence and stuff like that. And
that's got to be tough when you're adapting something that's so locked in to consciousness like that you're either going to be doing an imitation of Christopher Lloyd doing the character, or you're going to reinvent something new, and that's going to piss off the same people because it's like it's not exactly the way I remember it, right? I mean, that's a movie where, think of Troy Parkinson, who's obsessed with Back to the Future. That guy could probably recite that movie front to back, right? And so, and they start saying a line. That's not how he said it in the movie. Do they do the flame effect on the ground?
Yeah, but they do it like with smoke coming up, and so that's pretty cool. They also, the show-stopping number is from Goldie Wilson before, like in the 1950s, like after Marty's like, yeah, you're going to be the mayor. And he goes, mayor. And then he sings a song like, you got to work at it, which is, honest to God, a show-stopping number. And it feels like this doesn't belong in this show. They made some changes for the 21st century that are interesting. So if you recall in the movie, Doc Brown gets the plutonium from Libyan terrorists. And in this, they talk about how someone has broken into a secured facility and stolen plutonium. Yep. And so rather than being gunned down by the Libyans, his suit, his like biohazard suit rips, and he becomes like exposed to the plutonium, and so he's dying from radiation poisoning.
Sure. That's a good storytelling.
It's a good, yep. And it makes it so that like Marty it gives him a reason to leave. He's like, I'll get to the hospital, and he's like, don't drive 88.
Yeah.
And he drives 88. Like whoops.
What happens if you go over 88? Do you have to lock in at 88, or you just have to reach 88?
You have to reach 88, which in 1985, when this movie came out, I'm sure 88 miles per hour was a lot. I was going 88 yesterday. No sweat.
There needs to be a speed 3 that coincides with Back to the Future, where
the bus
you have to keep driving at 88, and so you just constantly traveling through time.
Yeah, you're never stopping. Like
a bus that couldn't slow down.
I love in movies and television shows when they pitch something that's already existed that just is dumb. So like in the episode of The Simpsons where Skinner gets fired, he tells Bart that he's wanted to work on this novel about cloning dinosaurs. And he goes, and the name will be Billy and the Clonosaurus. And Apu goes ballistic. And he's like, the movie already exists. It's called Jurassic Park. And then he goes like, you're infringing on all these copyrights. And then it says like cuts to like 5 minutes later. And Apu just finishes it with like, honestly, what were you thinking? I love that. Just like how I love when people crap on improv in movies and television shows.
How many Robert Zemeckis films have been turned into musicals? Just this? Is there he did Forrest Gump, right?
Yeah. There's no Forrest Gump musical yet.
That's got to happen at some point.
I feel like that's a good one. Yeah.
Because if the whole thing is let's just grind through IP and see what we can get people to come to theaters for.
Do you know that there's already a book written for like a Forrest Gump 2. The guy who wrote the book for Forrest Gump wrote Forrest Gump 2, and they've wanted to make it for a long time, and he was like, absolutely not. I don't like Robert Zemeckis.
Really?
Yeah. And so he goes, he just changed so much from my book. And so in the book, Forrest Gump is like 400 pounds. Did you know that?
No,
he's just a massive guy, and his learning disability is much more intense.
He's more okay.
Yeah, and so he's like, no, that's okay. People can just read my book, and people are like, but we think of Tom Hanks when we think of Forrest Gump. Okay, when you think about Romancing the Stone, could be a fun movie. Mm-hmm. Actually, that's not true. There's a brand new musical that just hit Broadway, a musical version of Death Becomes Her. Oh, and that's a Robert Zemeckis movie.
I did not know that was a Robert Zemeckis.
Yeah.
I don't know much about his. Like, I know of Future and Gump, and after that, I'm like, there's nothing really else I need to see, probably. I'm not a fan of all the motion capture stuff he's done, and is it called Here? The new one?
The movie that essentially is a stationary camera shot that takes place over like 3 million years.
I'm interested in that. That, to me, is interesting. What's not interesting to me is just the uncanny valley of the de-aging. Is still just not there. And hey,
here's the thing.
I'm all for filmmakers pushing the limits, but every time a filmmaker decides I'm going to push the limits, they fail on some big level.
To me, what bothers me is like this movie is basically a ripoff of the movie If These Walls Could Talk that tells the story of a single house and the inhabitants of the house over all these like over 120 years. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Robert Zemeckis, let's go through his filmography real quick and talk about he's made some real stinkers lately. Some really bad stuff. Okay, so let's go back to this. Oh, these are his producer credits. I need only his director credits. I don't like the way IMDb does their setup nowadays.
Yeah, it's a little confusing.
It is confusing,
little too
right?
Busy. It's a little too busy.
And like if you just figure out a good way to make it work. Okay, so let's talk about the things that he's made. Used Cars, great movie. Romancing the Stone, awesome. Back to the Future, great. His segment of Amazing Stories, I could see that. Like, he's got a couple good ones. Oh, Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Oh, my God!
I don't know how you do it as a stage show, but Who Framed Roger Rabbit would be amazing.
I forgot he did that. I love Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Mm-hmm. It's one of my all-time favorites.
Back to the Future 2 and 3 back to back. A TV movie called Two-Fisted Tales.
I think for Frame Roger Rabbit, it's really just if someone is attuned, they're just it's probably a costume designing thing.
You know what? Have you ever seen how they did The Lion King on Broadway with those the puppet? Yep. So the humans there, but they're puppeteering like not a life size but a small version of the puppet.
Yeah,
you could probably get away with that and it'd be pretty good.
And you're probably doing a lot of projection stuff too, because you want to be able to do things like doing a body shaped hole in the wall,
right?
Things like that.
You could probably get away with
actually that can be physical.
Having a real woman play like Jessica Rabbit, but you put the makeup effects on her and stuff like that to make her look like she's cell shaded. That might be good.
Yeah.
Forrest Gump, Tales from the Crypt. Ooh, he did actually one of my favorite episodes of Tales from the Crypt, where
Joe Pesci.
No,
cut in half?
No, that's
the only one.
That's a good one. But was that one of his?
I don't know. I didn't know he directed for
the one with the twins.
That's just the one episode that I remember because of the them figuring how the twins figured it out, and the fact that they
tan line
and they cut him down the center, so they each have one half of them.
Oh no, I think that's Joe Donner who does it, or I think it was Dick Donner, Richard Donner who did that one, because the picture of their father, I'm pretty sure is Richard Donner.
Okay.
No, so my favorite episode of Tales from the Crypt that he did, because I had the Robert Zemeckis collection of Tales from the Crypt, is he did this episode where it's a woman and her husband, and they've just put their daughter to bed on Christmas Eve, and she kills her husband by throwing him down a well.
Okay.
And so we
got to bring that back for a way of killing
down
people.
The well. Oh yeah,
killing people down the well. That's got to come back.
And so then she hears on the radio that an insane murderer has escaped from the local asylum, and he's got a Santa Claus suit. And so this guy is terrorizing their house now. And she's like, oh, I need to get the gun. Well, the husband's, the gun is in the husband's pocket at the bottom of the well. And this Santa Claus, who's he's got his face is all scarred up and kind of bloody and marred, but his Santa beard's all gross. But the little girl's like, Santa's here, and she lets him into the house, and he's got an axe, and he's gonna kill the whole family.
Why did she kill the husband?
They just didn't have any love anymore. Just no love.
Honey, can you look down look over the edge into the well to see if what
happens?
See what's down there a little further.
The movie Contact with Jodie Foster in 1997, 2000, What Lies Beneath, Castaway. Now you could make a Castaway musical, but you'd have to decide listen, we're going to be making fun of the movie Castaway is what we're going to do.
Wouldn't it be great if the reason he keeps casting Tom Hanks is not because Tom Hanks is a great actor, but because Tom Hanks has so much blackmailable material on Zemeckis?
Oh, 100%.
He's like, I'll hey, I want to buy another mansion. Hey, Rob, remember San Diego, 1987? Yeah.
Okay.
Let me know when we're filming.
Okay, Polar Express in 2004. Here's a movie that had so much talk about it when it came out, but it has disappeared. Beowulf.
My God, with Angelina Jolie as Beowulf's mother.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Or Grendel's mother.
Grendel's mother. Yeah,
right?
You're right.
Grendel's
Thank you.
mother.
Grendel's mother.
The Jim Henson Company is actually making a Grendel movie right now, and the effect that they've come up with, this puppet for Grendel, looks pretty awesome. Yeah.
Interesting.
Then he made A Christmas Carol, which is the worst version of A Christmas Carol I've seen.
It was with Jim Carrey?
Yeah.
As Scrooge.
Flight.
Yeah, there's no reason to do Christmas Carol motion capture.
No.
Zero.
No. The only thing that's good about that movie is the opening of it. Well, he made two choices I thought were interesting. Number one, it's Scrooge. It opens with Scrooge at the mortician's office after Marley has died, and he takes the 2 pennies off of Marley's eyes to keep them.
That is a great visual.
It's a great visual, and you don't think about it, right? And then it goes to five Christmases later. But the opening sequence is you're like a snowflake flying through London on Christmas Day, and it's great. And the score, Alan Silvestri's score for A Christmas Carol. Fantastic. It's got the moodiness, but it's got the light. And then and Andrea Bocelli, the opera singer, sings a song called A Candle's Light over the end credits. He's
amazing.
Out of this world. So good, so good. And so if we had to go through making that to get this, this is a movie that hardly anyone saw that's awesome called The Walk. And it's, I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt is in it, if I'm not mistaken, right? Hold on. Yeah. And it is about in 1974, the guy who put a line between the Twin Towers and then does the the stunt walk across it. Why don't that's a movie more people should see. A movie called Allied that came out in 2016 that I know nothing about. Welcome to Marwen, which has got Steve Carell about a guy who is viciously beaten and then he lives in this world. Have you seen that movie?
No, I've seen.
It's a 0 out of 10.
Really?
I saw it on Christmas and I almost walked out.
If you don't mind, just sort of switching subjects here all of a sudden, because that made me think of it. Have you seen Megalopolis?
I did.
So that's getting shit on.
Yeah.
Big time. A lot of people are calling it The Room with a Budget.
Yeah.
So what is your opinion of it? I'm not a Francis Ford Coppola dick writer. I'm much more into Sophie. I think her movies are better in general. I still love Godfather, but I think Coppola's Coppola, whatever.
Coppola.
I sometimes I get the sense that his masterpieces happen by accident.
Yeah.
Like in spite of him.
I think this. I think that how do I put this? A great grill master learns to use the tools that they have and become a master of those things. So when you only have a Weber kettle and charcoal, you figure out the best way to do that. But when you have 5 propane grills and someone else doing the prep, I just don't think that his heart was really in this.
Which is weird because he's been pursuing this since the 70s.
Yeah.
Which is wild to me. But then also, if you can't get funding for 40 years,
bingo, it
maybe
wasn't
you
meant to be.
Shouldn't make almost 50 years. You shouldn't make the fucking movie.
To me, like, you just don't need. It's a story that you don't need right now, and it's not a timeless feeling story.
Yeah.
I also think that, and this is going to be controversial, but just because you can get Adam Driver doesn't mean you should use Adam Driver.
Right. He is a really good actor, but there is a notion of he will give this thing some sort of art cred for being such a fucking weirdo when he's in his movies.
Bingo.
And you actually need to pair him with a really strong director who can direct an actor like that. I think the same with Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah. Actually, her movie that's out right now, My Old Ass, is really great, where she's like a full-fledged adult and she ends up meeting up with her younger self, and her younger self is like realizing, oh, I didn't turn out to be the awesome person I thought I was going to be. It's a really intriguing concept, and this person works really well with Aubrey Plaza, and like, hey, listen, you're not just a Christina Ricci knockoff.
What is it about Megalopolis that's so bad? Why is it considered The Room with a budget?
I mean, I think that I will say this. What Hollywood has liked this last year is crapping on movies and making you think that they're so bad that maybe that's how they save it, right? It's so bad you got to see it. That's how Borderlands was, right?
Okay, sure.
And so I feel like that's what this is. Like, if we can't get great reviews, let's get enough bad reviews that people like have to go see it. The visuals aren't there. It's way too long for what it needs to be, and you don't care about any character. Right. And I think that comes down to the editing of it. I think this is a poorly edited movie, and maybe it was rushed.
Oof.
Yeah, it didn't get its time to sit there.
That's weird that something that's been in development for 40 years gets rushed on the execution.
But I
guess COVID happened during the shooting, though. A lot of different things happened that you couldn't have foreseen.
And I also think too, like, they'll tell you when, like, we need this for blank, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can't deliver it by then, we're not going to give you money for it.
I haven't been a fan as well of the stories of Coppola getting handsy with the extras.
Yeah.
He was doing a lot of nasty stuff.
Yep.
Not a fan of that guy.
No.
I love The Godfather. It's a great film. I think The Godfather Part 2 is good.
Godfather 3?
What? I think... I have not I would like to watch the re-edit of it, where I think they call it a coda.
Yeah.
Because I'd be interested in seeing that. I think Apocalypse Now is fine.
But I like the documentary about Apocalypse Now more than I like Apocalypse.
More.
You know, like, which is funny because that becomes the premise for the movie Tropic Thunder, right? Like,
which is a far superior film.
I think that Francis Ford Coppola is a guy who has like had a great eye, but he had a great eye for celluloid filmmaking, and it's lost in this modern world. There are people who understand how to do a movie that doesn't have any previs
Yeah.
And there are people who can do that. And unfortunately, he's not some, even in this, the color correction and the things that take place feel off-putting. And you're like, oh, well, clearly you just don't understand the modern tools. And here's an example. I had to make a movie for work recently, and it was pretty easy. I was taking established clips. All I had to do was like cut them down, put a transition, add a voiceover for it. No sweat. So I double click on iMovie on my Mac. And I haven't used iMovie since...
Oh my God, that still exists?
2005? When did you do your movie a month challenge?
2010.
2010. Okay. So 2010 was the last time I used it for anything.
Right, because you were doing the challenge.
Because I was doing
videos.
the challenge, and I would just... And even by the end of that, I started just like recording it with my phone and being done,
right.
one and done.
Right.
They've changed that program drastically. In fact, I feel like they've dumbed it down to the point of where like I had trouble using it for what I needed for its purpose. And I realized I am no longer someone who understands modern video editing software.
Got it.
Right? Mm-hmm. And because of that, I shouldn't be doing this. I should be asking someone who is well versed in it to cut these things together. And I feel like that's what's going on with Francis Ford Coppola. And it happens with other modern creators in so many different ways. It's not just filmmakers. It's also, it's when you get a musician who decides that they want to do a new album and they're like, well, yeah, but how are you going to release this on, what's the 10-second part that we're going to take and put on TikTok? And you're like, I've got this album about, the death of my father that I really want to put out. And they're like, that's just not how it works nowadays.
God, you're really hitting on something that I've been thinking about a lot for a few years now, and I'm not gonna get on my AI tangent here a little too much, but those of us who find a lot of meaning by making art, multimedia art, are overwhelmed typically with the pressure of making deliverables, right? Mm-hmm. We got to get this commodity thing out there because that's part of the recouping your costs and making some money, and it's all understandable. But I think in terms of I would love to be a Coppola who could focus on one thing, just making that movie, and then going, I'm not going to worry about the rest of the teasers and stuff like that, versus like in my day job, I'm making as many deliverables as they can squeeze out of me a day, and there's little to no meaning to any of it. It's tough for me mentally. I struggle with it, even though it's not something new to me, and it's something I knew going in. But maybe it's just because I'm getting older and I'm watching the clock tick down, and I'm like, how many more years am I going to be spending making ephemera like this that no one gives a shit about?
Did you ever listen to the Blockbuster podcast series? Uh-huh. I please go home and like listen to the first 2 episodes today.
Right now?
Yeah, and like listen to. There's only 2 seasons, and it's a travesty that there's only 2 seasons. But the first season is about very young George Lucas and very young Steven Spielberg.
Oh, okay. I remember you
talking
about this.
It's so good. And there's an episode where they talk about George Lucas screening Star Wars in like its rough cut for Spielberg, Scorsese, Coppola. Jonathan Demme, I think, is there, and so he screens it, and Steven Spielberg is the only one who sees the value in it, and he's like, yeah, but you got to edit it and like do this and da-da-da. And I think about something like this, like, oh gosh, look at all those people in there, and like some of them, Martin Scorsese still makes some good movies. I don't think they're perfect, and his love of de-aging is weird for me. Yeah. But
also not a huge Scorsese fan. I think his stuff's fine.
Like I like The Departed.
I might just be tired of paying tribute to these old filmmakers, but keep going.
Okay, and that's my thing. They should be helping usher in the next generation, right? Mm-hmm. You should be able to like have these people who have this eye, this vision for it, and why are they not helping bring up the next generation? In the 80s, you think of like Spielberg helped, certainly helped like Robert Zemeckis and helped Joe Dante, even though they're almost the same age as he is, but like he brought in new directors who could do the same thing that he was kind of doing, which is telling amazing stories. But there's a world where why is there not an apprentice program that they're working on right now where Francis Ford Coppola says, listen, we're going to do Megalopolis. And he brings in another young director who also understands the new medium of making a movie, and they work together to make something amazing, right? I mean, because you kind of had that like way back in the day, with like the like Charlie Chaplin. I've got I just ate a third of a pancake.
Yeah,
that was the size of a pizza, like a large pizza, and so now I've got the pancake yawns.
Check the thumbnail for the image.
Yeah, right. Oh my God.
We're gonna call this episode the Pancake and Projection Perspective.
Oh, I love that. But do you get what I'm saying here? Like, in a way, some of these old creators, hoping not to be put out to pasture, have become gatekeepers.
Yeah, and a little too, they've forgotten where they came from.
Yeah.
And I think specifically of Scorsese, I can understand a lot of his criticism for Marvel movies and stuff like that, how they're maybe not to his liking. But I remember.
But what about someone who says, I don't like mob movies?
Yeah.
Right? And he's like,
The notion of this is or is not qualified as cinema is
good, right?
Is just. It's a yawn fest. It makes me go, I don't think I have anything in common to talk with you about, man. If I would love to meet these filmmakers just as a fan of movie making, and I'd still be starstruck if I met Coppola or Scorsese. But if we're going to sit down and talk about, maybe here's what I'm trying to get at. Because these arts are collaborative and commodified, the initial point of human expression is totally lost. So in a big budget movie and a director goes, I really want this scene to play out like this. And they have to justify it to everyone else around them versus, no, this is what I feel. This is just how I want to express the scene. They actually have to go, well, that might be a little scary for this demographic and we have to do this or do that. And you're ending up, you are focusing on the commodity part of it, which will happen regardless. Mm-hmm. And there's there's such pressure to turn away from, well, the director wants it that way, right? I would rather see a movie that I didn't like, but knew this is how the director wanted it, than a movie that I didn't like and it was because it went through a whole process of suits and sweaters talking about how it should be.
There's something for the fact that, like, for a movie to be considered successful nowadays, it needs to, like, bring in triple its budget. But when you're making Beetlejuice for $120 million, so you know that you need to bring in $500 million for it to be successful,
right,
$500 million.
Because if that's the production budget, then multiply that by 2, because then that's your marketing budget.
Right, bingo. And so, so back in the day when they make a movie like Easy Rider and it costs $1 million and it can play in theaters for 6 months, and it can make $4 million. And all of a sudden, like, oh, okay, well, this movie is successful then.
Yeah. I guess for a long time, too, we've seen, especially movies aimed at kids. I'm just going to think of the Shrek series for a moment. Mm-hmm. They do a ton of pop culture drops that in the moment is...
Someone told me recently that Shrek is the Family Guy of DreamWorks films, and I can't not see that anymore.
I could definitely see that. But this might just be a generational perspective too, but if I were to sit down and watch a Shrek movie now, it would be the same feeling of being at Walmart. It's just like, there's nothing pretty here. Everything's gross. Everything's disposable. Everything is short term. But versus going and watching The Lion King, right? I'm trying to think of any pop culture references in that. There might be one or two that I'm not even thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, there's when he sings "It's a Small World" when Zazu, and then he also sings.
I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts.
Yep, and then they've got the. I mean, there's a couple of little things,
but those are very broad, and those are actually not, if I remember correctly, it's nothing that would have been pop culture in the moment, right? Oh, this song is hot right now.
Right, true.
It's got
timelessness to it.
Like, how many movies used "Who Let the Dogs Out"? Who Let the Dogs Out? Right? How many did? So many, and it seems that and I think here's another reason why it's probably popular. Guessing is that when you see a cartoon wolf and suddenly has to answer his cell phone, the kid is, oh, that's what I see my mom and dad do, right? So if the hippopotamus is making a joke about twerking, right, they know that's speaking to the culture that their parents have grown up in, and they're seeing that there. And it's like, oh, isn't this silly? I'm seeing the same thing that my parents do or talk about. And the parent gets a moment of going, and then they go back to their phone because they're just there to pacify the kid.
I think that there's some.
Am I shaking my hand at clouds, my fist at clouds right now, JJ?
No.
I feel like a fuddy-duddy.
Because if you said, JJ, you need to make the most generic, evergreen movie of all time, I'm like, okay, so there's a scene where one character walks into a bathroom and another character is wearing a shower cap and they cover themselves with a shower curtain. That will be universal for the rest of time. Someone bathing, even though who really uses a shower cap? Right. Another thing that's universal, an old person trying to do something and it's not happening and it's a running gag. So they're trying to put their teeth in, but they're constantly like being hit on the back or something scares them and the teeth are constantly. And so the final thing, you get a payoff at the end credit sequence where they finally get their teeth in and then they take a bite into an apple and the teeth stay in the apple. Done. I'm telling you, Hollywood should come knocking to me because I do not mind being an ultra sellout and I will make you the most generic, easy piece of garbage you'll love.
That's true. Here I am kind of on my high horse going, this is not artistic. If any movie studio was like, hey, we'll pay you $1 million to do, I'd be, let's do it. Let's do 5 of them.
It's like, I was just reading about the actor Richard Kind. Okay, so Richard Kind, who's been in a bunch of things, including my favorite role is Larry's cousin in Curb Your Enthusiasm. But the article is about how he never turns down a role. And he goes, what's a job? Well, I mean, what are you doing on Tuesday?
Right.
You know, and he goes like, so I will be in anything, which is funny because he was in that Tank House movie that was made in Fargo. So like, you offer Richard Kind a part and he'll take it.
Yeah.
You know, he's up for it.
What's the Michael Caine quote about someone said, oh, I saw Jaws 3. Is that what he's in? Jaws 3? And I didn't care for the movie. And Michael Caine's response was, yeah, well, I've never actually seen the film, but I've seen the house it bought my mother and it's beautiful.
Right? And at one point you have to realize, like, yep, sometimes,
fuck yeah.
You know, like, even if you are a rich and famous actor, sometimes you take a job to take a job.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm not above that.
No.
So trust me, if you can't get Zach Galifianakis or whatever chubby, person is the it guy right now.
Is he still chubby these days? I thought he was
I think
skinny.
he's lost some weight. But he also, when was the last time you saw him in something?
He was just in Murders in the Building.
Yeah, right? And so...
But I didn't see him in it. I saw the promo for it.
He came out of retirement for that.
I didn't know he was retired.
Yeah. So, and apparently he lives in like some small town and he's like, yep, I've just been raising my kids.
Good for him.
Because like he had like 5 years where he was in every movie.
Yeah. I knew he owned like a farm.
Yeah. I think my favorite movie that he's in where he gets to play like a character is The Campaign, where he plays... He used to do this thing where he had like a twin brother who would come on, and his twin brother had that kind of effeminate Southern accent. And in it, he and Will Ferrell are campaigning like for this role. And there's a scene where his name is Marty Huggins, and he announces to his family that he's running. But if there's any secrets or fibs, that he would appreciate that they say it, and he won't get mad. And he won't get in trouble, but we need to know that because there will be some media scrutiny. And one of the little boys goes, I use the Lord's name in vain. And he is sucking out of a straw and his eyes go wide. And then he puts it down and he goes, I promised I wouldn't get mad and I won't get mad. And the next little boy goes, sometimes I go to the petting zoo and I put peanut butter on my penis and let the goat lick it off. And it's such a stark change, and they're like, what? And then it goes back to the first little boy saying, the old biker guy at the end of the street let me see his old lady's titty. And I shared a beer with him. And then it cuts back to the other kid, and he goes, sometimes I go to the mall and I hide under the stairs and take pictures of girls' skirts. I got a whole box of cooter shots. And then the wife goes, I touched myself to Drew Carey on The Price is Right. And all of these things that they start admitting out of nowhere. And it's just like, it's a perfect example of a moment in a movie where he's supposed to be the wild and crazy one, right? And they let the chaos overtake him. It reminds me of like when you watch the Nutty Professor movies and they have any of the dinner scenes with the whole Clump family, and it's beautiful chaos.
Do you think you've yet reached a level of local celebrity where you are a listener's fantasy out there?
That's a good question. You're listening to this right now, and I am like, send us a note. No hair or blood.
You should get Amy to be like, hey, listen, if you fantasize about JJ, let us know.
I know that when I was doing those bad banker commercials, there was definitely a time when grandmas were trying to set me up with their granddaughters. Like, that was 100%, because they would pull me aside in the grocery store and
little matchmaker, right. Make me a match. You're on TV.
Be like, oh boy,
you must be famous.
You're a celebrity. Do you live here? That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to help us continue to produce new episodes each week, visit jjmeetsworld.com, where you can donate to our Patreon, pick up some swag at the merch shop, or follow our link to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the sites the cool kids are using these days. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by visiting moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, check out linebenders.com, where you can find direct contact info for JJ or booking information. That pancake is a slap in the face. Who's going to eat something like that? Fuck.